Hello, it's Paul and it's
Megan.
And welcome to the ESPC Property Show. And in this episode,
we are speaking to Nicky and Martyn from ESPC Lettings to chat all about what's been happening in the lettings market, because there's been quite a lot.
Quite an eventful time, and all changed from the start of April. So we'll be getting their take on what it means for landlords, also what it means for tenants. And we also talk about a wide range of topics, including HMOs.
So it's well worth a listen if you are a tenant or a landlord, or you're thinking about becoming either one of those.
But even if you're not.
I hope you enjoy the episode.
Welcome, this is the Lettings edition, and we've got Martyn and Nicky from ESPC Lettings.
Hi.
Let's get started.
This is one of our most popular episodes again every season. People love to hear what's happening in the lettings market. So what is happening in the lettings market?
It's an interesting time, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got you just at the start of April here, and things have changed.
Yeah, things are always changing when it comes to the rental market. But there's been big changes that came into effect from the 1st of April in terms of the rent cap that had been in place is no longer. And the other big one was there's no longer any ban on evictions. So those are the two big things.
Quite significant, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're for both landlords and tenants. They're kind of different from different sides, but both big decisions that have been made moving forward as to what happens with the rental market now.
Okay, well, let's talk about the rent cap going, but there's a new mechanism in place, isn't there now? Do you want to explain that? Because it is quite complex, isn't it?
When I say do you want to explain it, I'm not sure I want to explain it. I'm going to try to explain it. So a landlord can now increase their rent by any amount that they like. So if your tenant is on a private residential tenancy, you can contact them, give them 3 months' notice.
And this can be for a tenant that's been in 3 weeks, a month? Is there a minimum period?
Yeah, so they have to be in for 12 months.
Okay.
So no rent increases within the first 12 months.
Okay, well, that gives them some certainty.
So they'll have been in for a little while, and then we can contact them to propose the increase. They need to give them 3 months' notice. But the big news, I guess, is that the increase can be any amount that the landlord feels that they would like to suggest.
Okay. And this might be landlords where they've got a buy-to-let mortgage, their costs have gone up, and they're trying to pass some of those costs through.
Exactly, yeah. So it can be a number of reasons. So the landlords themselves are trying to get their situation back on a more even financial keel. Some landlords have been really lagging behind what the market rent is. So they're trying to move things up to a bit more of a realistic rent. And those are going to be the two main kind of reasons why we're seeing landlords making those increases. But I think it's important that tenants realise that they can appeal these rent increases if they feel that they are too high.
And how do they appeal?
So they are, on the notice that's provided, there is a form that they can fill in and then just return that back to us to let us know that they would want to make an objection. It can go to the first tier tribunal and then a rent officer. I think certainly
that sounds quite formal. Is there an informal route?
So it's certainly what we would try and do. I think first steps are tenant comes back to us and says, this is just beyond my means, is we have a chat with them, what is within your means, go to the landlord and try and work something out. And I think that's always going to be the way that we're going to try and do that. So hopefully it wouldn't get to that kind of having to go through a first tier tribunal and make all of these calculations, because that's when it does start to get a little bit more complicated.
And generally landlords like the same tenant to stay in there. And the tenants like to stay, don't they? Everyone feels like it's their home. So,
absolutely. In fact, I was just on a call then to a landlord. She's got a number of properties with us. She wants to increase some of them. But she said, my tenants are great. I'd rather have great tenants that want to stay, but I need to keep things moving in some direction. So she's just doing a small increase. And a lot of landlords are of that same mindset. So it doesn't automatically mean that all landlords are going to just run crazy and put rents up. Yeah.
And you say there is a safety valve here of an appeal process, and there is I'm using the word cap there, but there's a limit to how much if it goes through the appeal, is there not?
Yeah, so they're using what they call a tapering system, and there is actually a calculator on the Scottish Government website if landlords want to calculate what their current rent is and what the market rent is and where they should be pitching. If they're not sure, then there is that tool available. If the tenant disputes the increase, then they would go to the rent officer, and then there's a kind of a market value. If it's somewhere between 6% of the current rent and the market value, then they should agree to that. If the rent officer decides that there's more of a difference, then they can review that again. But what they're suggesting is that no rent would be increased more than 12%.
Okay.
That would be the cap that the
upper
rent
limit.
officer would put into place. But that's only if the tenant objects.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So, and if they don't object, whatever is proposed could stand?
Yeah. And I mean, that was how it used to be,
Yeah.
to be honest. So
Yeah.
it's just, I think, because people have got so used to restrictions and things being capped and things being much more monitored, that this sounds kind of crazy all of a sudden. But actually, before all of the rent caps, people could just increase their rent by whatever means. And if the tenants weren't happy, then we had an open discussion, and that's how things got
But the
resolved.
market forces may play out here. I mean, clearly if the landlord asks too much, tenant might leave and the landlord has an empty property, and that costs them every month, doesn't it? So there is a market force at play as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. We might see kind of people start to give notice, start to move around to see if there's other things available.
Yeah.
It's just difficult to know, I think, yet, how it's going to
So, I mean,
how it's gonna work out,
we're a few
yeah.
days in. It's going to take a while to wash out, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, tenants are only just starting to get those notices now, so we've not really had any response yet.
No.
So let's see over the next couple of days.
And there's no window for that. That can just happen. So once 12 months happens, that can...
Yeah.
So at any point after the 12 months?
Yep.
So it's not all has to happen in April. It can happen at any
No,
time.
so at any stage once the tenant's been in more than 12 months,
Yeah.
it can be at any stage, and then it's once every 12 months thereafter. So, if you end up with a tenant that's been there quite a long time, you can review the
Of
rent
course, yeah.
every 12 months.
But as you say, some landlords might say, look, I'd far rather a happy
Yeah,
paying tenant
yeah,
than a small increase. So, as you say, it's case by case, really, isn't
yeah,
it?
definitely.
And the rent cap had been in place since 2020. Is that right? Or
I think so. Is it?
So it's-
is that
it-
one?
I think it was, and then it came in, and then it didn't change or got a bit.
Yes. So it was initially surrounded COVID,
Yeah.
when people were obviously, were working, were maybe furloughed, were on less hours. That we saw kind of lots of redundancies, people in hospitality, uncertainty. So I think it was led by that really, and then it was, it was just a rent freeze initially. So that was nothing, and then. So actually when it changed to 3%, that was almost a bit exciting for landlords. They hadn't been able to do anything, and then they could get 3%. So, I'm
And that
surprised.
came in along with the eviction ban as well at the same time.
Yeah.
and all that kind
And in fairness, some landlords did take less during COVID when people were on furlough.
Yeah,
20%
definitely.
reduction in rent, 20% reduction in people's earnings. That did happen, didn't it? It wasn't just...
yeah, no, absolutely.
all
And I
one
think
way.
that's the importance of having a good relationship.
Yeah.
Landlords, tenants, if you're using an agent, having somebody in the middle sometimes is easier to have that conversation. It can get a little bit awkward. But yeah, through good communication, anybody that we had where they had agreed a rent reduction during COVID, as soon as that time passed and they were back on their feet, rent resumed, and everything was fine. So it was just really, it was kind of nice that everybody at a time kind of pulled together and made things work.
Yeah. So I guess if there's any tenants who maybe feel like it's time to move because they've maybe had an increase, or they just fancy a change of residence, what advice would you give to anyone who's looking at the moment?
Oh God, I'll let mine.
What kind of advice would you give a tenant? Be sure that you want to move. Actually, don't allow this kind of change of rent to make you move, because if you move, you might be moving somewhere that's going to be more expensive. So first and foremost, make sure you've got the right reasons for moving, but also look for somewhere that fits what you need. Make sure it's not just because you feel like you're getting cold feet in your current property. Also, make sure you can afford to live in a place that you're looking to move to. Obviously, the big thing when you're applying for property, we'll ask you certain questions, criteria that we're looking for. Make sure that you're honest with us. There's no point in getting halfway through the process and then it falls flat because you failed to answer a question on your application. That's almost important. We've had situations if we ask you about a guarantor and you've got that in place, make sure that you do have a guarantor in place, or that you're willing
Well,
to...
they know about it.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
you're willing
that's
to
another
use them as a
surprise.
guarantor as well. Yeah, I think...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And have we seen, I know we were talking about this earlier, students looking for properties now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
is there any advice around that? I mean, was that a one-off or was that common?
No.
Or?
No, it's constant on the phone. Students coming to try and get properties now to secure it, and I think because the demand is so high for them, people just want to make sure they've got it there for when it comes to whenever university starts. But again, the property market's changing all the time, so it means that there will be properties that come up. You might want to consider as well, if you're able to afford it, to move into a property now or to take on a lease to start it a bit earlier.
Yeah. Because I think, especially for students, when it hits kind of September time and they all arrive back, there's, I don't know there's going to be not many properties around. You know, we're advertising just at the moment a HMO flat, and it was just inundated with inquiries. But you know, they're like, yeah, we want to move in September. And like, well, actually, it's empty now. We're looking for someone to move in. And they're like, yeah, well, actually, maybe we should. And you know, that's what people are having to do. And whether or not they use it over the summer months, maybe a little bit. But the fact that they're going to have something for when they come is what people are having to do. And we saw that happening last year, and I think it's going to be even more so this time out. Yeah.
And do you see students kind of stay for the duration of their studies in the same flat, or do they move about?
Yeah, so people are definitely staying. So before it would be, you know, it comes to the end of the year, they'd give up their lease, go home for the summer and come back. Whereas I think now what they're doing is keeping that flat on again, so they've got something where they come back. So I think landlords were maybe initially, or you know, if I rent to a student, they're only going to be here like 10 months or something. Whereas actually if you rent to someone just going into their second year, you might get them in the same flat all the way through.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so less churn, so less available properties, I would imagine,
Exactly,
on that basis.
Yeah, because I remember when I was a student, I don't know if people still do this, but we would almost, if somebody had a good flat and they were moving out, you almost coordinated so you could go. So when you said to your landlord, "Oh, we're leaving," but actually we've actually got replacement tenants already because.
And that happens not just in student flats.
Yeah,
Okay.
even as young professionals, you might be flat sharing or house sharing.
Yeah.
So there's constant changes there as well.
Or people that are, you know, moving, they might be a single person, you know, in a flat, and they're moving on with their job, but they know somebody else at the company that they work with that's kind of desperate to find a property. So that's happening more and more often as well,
Okay. If you're a landlord and you're listening to this, what advice would you give landlords? I mean, we've mentioned some of the changes coming in, and there's been a bit of negative sentiment in the press about buy-to-let, but there's still a demand there. There's still the opportunity to get a steady income and see an increase in the asset over time. What advice would you give a landlord?
So I think landlords in the last year or so have been nervous about getting into the market because they think they're not going to be able to increase their rent, and they're not going to be able to get their tenant out. So those have been two things that have maybe made potential new landlords cautious. But now they've always been able to serve notice, but now we can actually move quicker on evictions if we do need to get the tenants out quicker.
And what reason can a tenant be evicted now?
So, I mean, all sorts. So if you were looking to evict your tenant, so say if you've served notice on whatever ground it might be, and they don't leave at the end of the tenancy, then that's when we would be looking to get an eviction notice. So whilst the eviction ban has been in place, you can still apply for that eviction order, but we haven't been able to action it unless there are certain things which are kind of, you know,
financially
so the really kind of financial burdens, antisocial behaviour, then those things have been able to be actioned. So now you can just apply for those eviction orders, and they should hopefully come through relatively quickly. Once that has been granted, then they're actioned, you know, and your tenant is out. So I think people or landlords were nervous about not being able to get possession back, so that should be easier now, and you know they are going to be able to increase the rents. There is a desperate need for property. That's been the case now for the past couple of years and isn't getting any better. There is still need more properties in the rental market.
Any particular type of property that's been proven more popular than others?
I would say one bedrooms.
One bedrooms or hot.
Yeah,
it seems to be
as soon as we get a one bedroom that comes on the market, it's just inundated with inquiries, and it just moves really quickly. And that can be for a single person or a couple that are, looking to move in. But one bedrooms, there just doesn't seem to be many of those around. So as soon as we get one and they are snapped up, yeah.
And what sort of rent would you expect for a one bedroom? I mean, I know it depends where it is,
depends
but
on the location, depends on
Yeah.
a few things, but
I mean, it's getting crazy.
between what's 800 and 1,000?
Yeah, so
more or
really
less?
you're not going to get anything these days, let's say, any less than maybe 750.
Okay.
And then depending on the area, I would say you would be an average. You could expect up to £1,000 in some areas. Then, of course, there are bigger and different types of properties that you can get more and more for. But, there are properties that traditionally might have only been getting £600 500 years ago, 500 years ago, 5 years ago. And they're just getting kind of 800-900 now. Wow. So the one bedrooms are where the biggest rent increases have happened for sure.
A bit like property market, isn't it? Until we see an abundance of stock.
Yeah, then that's what will happen, yeah.
Yeah, and it's crazy because that's obviously affecting potentially just one per occupant that's having to carry that burden.
Yeah.
Oh, that's quite crazy. So looking ahead then to the rest of the year, we've had the first quarter out of the way. And what are we thinking will happen throughout the rest of the year?
You'll have some holidays.
I mean, firstly, where did the first quarter go?
Indeed, yeah.
I mean, that seems to have sped by. And like kind of normally that's a quieter time of year, and now we're entering the kind of
close to the summer.
Busier time. So what we'll start to see is more people wanting properties.
Increasing students.
Yeah, more students, more people looking for properties. It remains to be seen whether we're going to see that coming back, the relet kind of churn coming back. But I don't know in terms of stock that it's going to be much of a different picture from where we were this time last year, really.
We've got some stock that's hanging about, sticking a little, isn't it? But it's the higher end.
Yeah, because what happened was landlords, when they got the opportunity, were putting their rents up. But realistically, tenants can only afford what they can afford.
That's it. The market's trying to find its place
so
at
you
the
can
moment
keep
in the balance.
hiking up a rent, but it's
Doesn't mean
you're
you're
only
going
going
to
to
get
what somebody can afford to pay for it at the end of the day. So just working with landlords and having those chats, and realistically, some of those where we've pitched quite high to begin with have had to come down to more manageable levels for tenants to be able to get them let.
That's interesting.
Yeah, people can only afford what they can afford, I guess.
Can I ask a question about students then? So HMO, that's multiple occupancy. I always struggle with that word. It's one of those words I can't say. Got it out there. No pressure. That means students can live anywhere, can't they? But there's a limited number you can have in a 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom. Is that right? I mean, can 5 students share a 2 bedroom flat? No.
No, unless they're very chummy.
Maybe for 1 month, yeah.
I mean,
and related as well.
Yeah. So the houses of multiple occupation is when 3 or more unrelated people are living together.
Right.
So what they class as unrelated would be just friends.
Us.
So if we were all to be living together in
podcast,
some form
every
of
day,
chaos, we would need a HMO.
Yeah.
But if you have a couple and their friend, then you don't need a HMO license for that, because that couple are classed as one unit.
Even if they're unmarried, do you have to prove that?
Well, I'm not going to lie, there's times that I've been doubtful. But it seems a step beyond So a couple and their friend is fine. You don't need a HMO license for that. But 3 or more unrelated people, so just 3 friends, 3 work colleagues, 3 acquaintances, then they would need the HMO. If you had 2 couples living in a 2-bedroom flat, that's fine, because each couple is classed as a unit, so that would be okay. Depends on what a landlord wants for their property as well. Sometimes the wear and tear, if you have 4 people living in a 2-bedroom flat, the landlords are maybe not so keen on that. So it would be, but it's if they're unrelated. it says.
And
Yeah.
what kind of criteria does the landlord then have to fulfill to have an HMO license?
So they need to have a license in first place, and so they need to apply to the council for that. The certain criteria in which the property needs to meet, so there needs to be obviously the smoke alarms you should already have in place, but you also have to have fire certificates, so like a fire risk assessment needs to be done in the property. The doors need to be of a certain standard as well, fireproof doors. I'm trying to remember the list of things that they ask you for.
You don't need sprinkler system, do you?
No, not in.
Oh yeah.
Unless it's type of property that it is.
Okay.
But you'd have like, fire blankets and stuff like that in place.
Yeah.
In different locations.
It depends kind of on what floor you're on as well. If you're over kind of 3 or 4, you have these kind of like the railings that you need to have over some windows if you're above a certain floor. So it depends very much on the type of property.
And is the location a factor? Is there zones where you're just not going to get a HMO, or could you potentially get one anywhere in the city?
Yes, I mean obviously you have to apply for the licence, so that goes onto the property, and the neighbours can object to that, put in their objections or anything to say that they don't want it happening. And then if they do, then obviously you're not inclined to get the licence. Doesn't mean you can't rent it your property.
Sure.
It just means
Can't have a HMO.
it limits who you can rent it to.
Right.
But it was more for neighbours to object. I don't think you're going to get to the case where you apply to the council and they say, no, there's already too many HMOs in that stair. We're not even getting you past that stage. It would go to notice, in the building, and then the neighbours would object.
And if an investor is listening and they don't know where to start looking, what areas would you recommend that they...
Anywhere. Anywhere and everywhere.
You'd buy one bedders though, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, what I always say is, Edinburgh is really not that big a city, and it's really easy to get around. We've got good transport links. It's easy to get from one side to the other. And I think if you were to put a pin in, say, where the castle is, and do a 2-mile radius all the way round and buy a 1-bedroom flat in that 2-mile radius, then you'd be great.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And you'd be amazed how much that 2 miles covers, because it takes you down to Leith, it takes you, kind of into Newington, down into Stockbridge, along kind of Gorgie, Polworth Fountain Bridge. So it's amazing how much that 2 miles, because it's
I
such
can
a
feel
small...
a show coming on here. Nicky's pin, and see how far we can... Because we did the commuter challenge, that was 30 minutes, wasn't it? But it wasn't a geography, wasn't a distance thing, it was more of a time thing.
See what you can get in
2 miles.
In a 2 mile. But yeah, a pin in the castle, 2 miles round, 1 bed in there. Job's goodie.
Yeah, okay. That's great advice.
Yeah.
Well, I've enjoyed that, and we took a bit of a dive into how we went off the path down the rabbit hole of HMOs, but we all learned something there. So thank you. Really enjoyed that.
Thanks
for your
very
time,
much,
guys.
Thank you.
See you in 3 months. Okay, that was the show. We went down a few rabbit holes there, didn't we? The HMO rabbit hole.
Yeah, we did, and I think hopefully that was intriguing for anyone.
And informative,
Yeah.
And I'd say, really interesting to have that debate around, the market and what might play out. I think nobody really knows. I think the market's got to find its own level with all these changes. It's been a lot recently, but certainly it's pretty clear there's still demand out there from tenants to find somewhere, and sounds like there are some new landlords coming to market, which is good because there is a shortage of stock.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like or a share. Share it with somebody you think would also like it. That would mean a lot to us.
It would mean a lot to us.
And also make sure you are subscribed wherever you're listening. So whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or watching us on YouTube. And that'll mean that you get notified every time an episode drops on Thursday.
And if you see somebody walking in a circle 2 miles from the castle, it's probably going to be Nicky.
Or one of us.
Or one of us.
So otherwise we will be here in your ears again next week.
See you then. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.